Hi, and welcome to another episode of You're in Charge. Now what? I'm your host, Glenn Pasch, and this is the channel where we help you build the skills necessary to help you be the leader you want to be, but more importantly, what your team needs you to be. So today I'm joined by Jay Acunzo. He has been so gracious to help me. And so it's an interesting, a little different episode because I think this is a great opportunity for leaders to realize that when you need help, it's okay to ask for help. And so what Jay graciously asked me, raised his hand where I raised my hand first and said he was kind enough to offer, hey, if anybody needs help with your podcast and what you're doing, come on, I'll be more than happy to help you. And so I raised my hand, of course, and said, hey, I need some help. So it's a great lesson. We as leaders, a lot of times everybody sees us thinking we have all the answers and we try to portray that. I think it's so important for everyone to realize that everybody needs help, no matter how high up the chain. You need someone above you or a team around you to help you get better. So Jay, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Great.
Yeah, my pleasure, Glenn. Thanks.
Yeah. So let me bounce this off of you because as you've grown, so let's talk about it. You've grown your business, you're out consulting. What's one of the biggest lessons you've learned about leading a team now yourself or a group yourself versus being part of a team? What's one of those differences in that transition for you?
The context is, I wanted to be a sports journalist. I ended up in tech and I worked in marketing and media roles for companies like Google and HubSpot. My last day job, if you call it that, was at a venture capital firm. I was their VP of brand. And since 2016, I've been kind of leading one of these solo creator careers, like speaker, author, been making shows for brands and clients and my own shows, all focused on the same thing, which is creativity at work. And what I realized now, I'm working with freelancers. So my team are all 1099s. But when I was in-house, I was hiring people as full-time employees. You sort of nailed the problem, I think, which is we profess to have the answers. And we do this as solo contributors, individual contributors, employees. And I think it's just exasperated when you're a leader. If you profess to have all the answers, your knowledge is finite. Your curiosity is endless. And so it's far better, I think, to be an explorer and position yourself as such than an expert, because there's no way in hell you have the answer and then the world as it changes doesn't conflict with that answer in some way. It's a lot better to get good at asking questions, at updating your knowledge, at pursuing curiosity, than it is to be hardened and say, yes, of course, I know the answer. So I think like really great leaders have this way of putting some kind of pause or distance in between, a teammate or a direct report asking them a question and then giving an answer, right? Perhaps you know an answer or suspect you do, but that's an assumption. So think about it. Ask questions to ensure that you understand their context. So I think that's what great leaders do. They don't have answers, but they're really great at asking questions. It's almost like they're raising their hand and saying, I don't know all the answers, but I'm going to find out.
I love that because it's funny you say that because probably about a few months ago, someone reconnected with me on Facebook who worked for me, many years ago. And he he gave me a great compliment. He said, Glenn, I still use things you taught me as a manager today. He said, but the funny thing is, I never remember you telling us what to do as a manager. He goes, but I remember you always asked a bunch of questions, almost leading them where they needed to go. I know where you need to go, but if I tell you where you need to go, there may be some fighting, defensive.
Yeah.
But if I lead you by asking questions, you'll get there, but you feel you got there on your own. So I think that's and I agree with you. The curiosity, leaders need to continually be curious because this is evolving. Everything's changing. Every day something's changing, and where we are today. I do consulting and marketing for car dealerships, a lot of them. And I say to them, well, the person who bought a car 3 years ago and where they're coming today, that difference, completely different, let alone COVID. I said, now think 3 years from now when they come back, what are they going to expect now? And you have to be prepared. You have to be flexible. So I really do appreciate that. Let me ask you a question though. So in that journey, there's been a lot of people in COVID. Some of them are forced into the situation where they have to go solopreneur. or get out and you're trying to figure it out your own. What was the impetus for you to make that jump? Like, what was the trigger that finally said, I'm going to do this?
Sure, sure. I mean, yeah, that's, if you can't tell, this is, I live a casual creative lifestyle here. I'm not a overly corporate type of person. So that was one point in favor of doing my own thing. But I remember it was 2015, actually. I was working for a venture capital firm that invested in tech startups, based in Boston. We invested in New York and a little bit in the Valley. And I loved it. It was the only job I ever held that at the time I left it, I still liked the job.
Right.
Which actually was one reason I knew I was ready to pursue my own thing, is I was moving towards something instead
Mhm.
of away from something, because I
Right.
wasn't unhappy, but I couldn't resist doing more with the things I was already starting to tinker on. So another point in the favor of doing my own thing. But the big thing was, I had been around, I think at the time that that firm had invested in like 55 startups. And there's this lore and legend around entrepreneurs that
Right.
they leap with 2 feet and they embrace wild risks and they see the future, and maybe to agree, like here
Right.
and there to a degree. But you know what everybody was really great at, all these entrepreneurs we invested in? Mitigating the risk. First of all, their stories, what they were building, the products felt inescapable to them. And that's why they were building it. Because they'd be like, here's a problem. It's an obvious problem in the world or for this type of customer. Of course, this would be the solution. Of course, you'd need to build a business to solve that problem. Of course, it's a good opportunity
Right.
to help others and build a thriving for-profit company. Like, of course. So for them, it was like the starting point wasn't, I'm going to be a visionary and take a huge risk. The starting point was, this is inescapable and obvious. Of course, I should pursue this. But then the more you dug into how they would do it, testing and learning and building, there's a great graphic of how startups actually build well today, which shows, instead of doing it like this, and it shows a wheel to a car, the
Right.
wheel and the framework, then the whole car. Don't do it that way. And then it says do it this way, and it shows a skateboard, then a scooter, then a bike, then the car, right? So they're always building these solutions to, like, I'm going to solve this little part of the problem right now and test my way forward. So what I realized that in VC is these great entrepreneurs are actually, one of their skills is really great mitigation of the risk. So I took that same approach. I had a really great friend and mentor that took me under his wing. He's a public speaker and an author. And I
Mhm.
always wanted to write a book. At that point, I hadn't yet. And he was starting a management company for aspiring authors and speakers. So
Right.
he showed me the ropes of how to do the public speaking thing and the business and the performance side of it. So I had a few of those gigs coming my way. I had a good teacher. So I was doing that on the side of my day job. And then I launched this podcast called Unthinkable, where I was playing with the form and the medium and really learning. And I was getting some good signal that people liked that show. And then I had my first client come my way to say, I like your show. Can you make a show like that for our brand as part of our marketing?
Interesting.
And so I had some opportunities. Yeah. So I had some proven success. And what I realized was I was just capped out in time. So I knew this is decent money, not life sustaining money yet, but
Mhm.
there's signal, some audience paying attention to my work on social media, on my podcast, through a newsletter. And it was enough to say, I'd like more time to do this. So I went from a day job with some side projects to actually a part-time job at the same firm to a part-time entrepreneurial endeavor to then full-time. And that whole transition took me 18 months maybe. And so that the punchline there is like, the story that you leap with 2 feet or you're not a true entrepreneur is
Right.
total crap. Like you can
Right.
mitigate the risk and ease into it. So you're testing your way forward.
I like that. I like that because I agree. I think we have this vision of entrepreneurs as we just get rid of everything, burn the boats, and here we go. And I think that's a fallacy in a lot of ways that not, I want to say young entrepreneurs, but any entrepreneur thinks that's the way they have to be. And I agree with you. I think the smarter way is to test it out, one, to see if you like it. Because the other thing that I run across is not everyone's built to be an entrepreneur. I learned how to run a company. I was always very comfortable at being number two. I'm good at number two. I'm great at operations. That was always my wheelhouse. And it just happened that I'm partners with my brother in our marketing agency, and we complement each other where he is more of
It's
the
great.
I have a great idea. Let's go. How are we going to do it? I don't know, but we got to do it. And then it's
Yeah.
like, I always joke, he throws it over his shoulder. I catch it and go, okay, let's build it. And then we grow that way. But I think a lot of people, entrepreneur now is sexy. I mean, when I was growing up, and I'm much older than you are, but if you said to people, I own my own business, people looked at you a little odd of,
Yeah.
well, why can't you work at the big company? Why
Right.
can't you
Entrepreneur was code for unemployed, right?
or it was more, you're not good enough to work in a company,
Huh.
right? That you had to go do this. Now, my grandfather was an entrepreneur. He owned his own music store. He came from Italy, built a very thriving, successful business. So we were surrounded by that, but there were still people who looked at it and said, yo, yeah, he's great. But where now it's almost being an entrepreneur is this cool, sexy thing. And people are missing that. One, it's a lot of damn work. And you can't shut it off. If it's your business, there is no 9 to 5 and I'm done. If that's what you're looking for, then you better go back and find work for a company that's going to allow you to do the 9 to 5. But I
Yeah.
think it's a misunderstanding of it. So you're right. It is this, I don't realize how much work it really is.
Sure.
Number two is, oh, it's cool. So I'm just going to pose and say, look how hard I'm working. And then on the other side is you think that it has to be all or nothing versus, which I like Gary Vaynerchuk in some ways, where he'd always say, start with your little side hustle, like test it out,
Yeah.
see if you
Yeah.
like it, see if it could be
But
sound viable up here, but may not make you money.
in many ways, but like Gary Vee is an example. Like Gary Vee spawned very many people who adore what they call hustle porn,
Yeah.
right? Where it's the lifestyle and the trappings and the followers more so than it is the stuff you don't see on camera, the stuff that's behind the scenes.
Right.
And by putting it out there, everything is on camera for Gary, so everything is a show for Gary.
Yep.
That's not everyone's reality, right?
No.
In many ways, everybody is just latching on to the glitz and glamour, or the perceived glitz and glamour, and they fail to recognize what actually goes on. And I think like the starting point to all of this, Glenn, could be, we're not taught, and my generation wasn't taught this either. I'm in my 30s. When you make a career decision, there's always this trade-off that's implicit, it's hidden, but I think we're better off facing it like overtly. We're just not told it's here. If you're going to go to a big company or a small company, if you're going to be your own boss or go work for a boss, even if you're in a company, you're navigating it, whenever you make that career move, there's always these two things that you're trading off: control and certainty. And I feel like they're inversely proportional. So when you have 100% control, you have 0% certainty because you just started your own thing. But then you start to scale your own thing and you're like, well, I need to get good at this thing or repeat this thing. So I'll put in some process and technology in place. So you have a little more certainty now. And I'm going to hire my right-hand partner. So I have less certainty and more certainty, less control. The more you have of one, the less you have of another. So when I talk to a friend of mine who works for Salesforce, giant software company these days, and she's unhappy about, well, I have all these meetings and she's a writer. We're talking about blogging, but we're not actually writing the content. Like, what are we doing? And I interviewed at a startup the other day, Jay, but the job seems better, but the pay is worse. And I'm like, no kidding. Because Salesforce is optimized for total certainty of money, direction, your time. It's all laid out for you. And if you love certainty, you'll love it there. But when you start to want control, you're going to be met with friction there.
Yes.
A startup, you're going to have a lot more control, not total, because it's not your company, but more control. The certainty is not going to be there, right? Certainty of pay, direction, the job being there in a couple of years, et cetera. And so I think we're better off trying to learn this about ourselves earlier. It's like, which do you value and to what degree, control or certainty? Because if you're someone who does value a lot of control, you actually might want to test out a smaller business or your own business. But if you're someone who values certainty, danger, right? You're not guaranteed to have the glitz and the glamour. And by the way, this is fluid, because in your 20s, you might want one, in your 30s, you might want another. So it's this self-awareness based
I was just going to say that it's an evolving strategy where maybe someone who, as you were saying, in their 20s, it's all right, I have time. So I'm going to try. I'd rather have either I have control, I can try all these things, but then all of a sudden family comes. I need that certainty, even if you don't like what you're doing, like love. to your point is, yeah, I may be in meetings, but I got great healthcare. I got good, this, that, everything's fine. Now,
Sure.
what happens then later is you see a lot of people, once they have that stability or a nest egg, or even I can lean more into the uncertainty, or go try and get more control of what I want to do, but I still have that certainty. So you can still let go. And it is why
Yeah.
you see some people later on in their lives saying, you know what, I'm done with corporate life and I'm going to do my own thing. But they've smartly potentially built up a nest egg where
Right.
that supplements the uncertainty
Yep.
of this new venture's not generating revenue. But you say, well, I can live for a year or 18 months or 2 years because I've planned to be able to do this, and you've balanced it. And I think that's a phenomenal topic or discussion, because I don't think a lot of people understand that, or the way you put it so succinctly. I don't think a lot of people think about that. They jump. I don't even think sometimes people think of control and certainty. It's just, well, this is what I want to do, and it sounds good. And to your point of the hustle, as long as I work hard, it'll work out. I'm like,
Mm,
but if if you need that certainty for yourself, there's going to be friction in your family. There's going to be friction other place where all of a sudden they're going, what
absolutely.
do you mean you left your job? What do you mean?
Absolutely.
Like, wow, what's going on?
And to your earlier point, the story seems to be like sexier to be an entrepreneur. And I think it's a really simple thing. Like that is what I do above all things. I tell stories. I write, I speak, I make shows. Like I want to be my grand illusion here. I want to be the Anthony Bourdain of business content, right? Like that's kind of like, I love the way he told story. When you learn about story structure, the things that grip you as part of a story, good writing, good film, anything, the kind of like most important variable, the most important addition to what you're producing to grip somebody, to grip an audience, is conflict.
Sure.
Conflict, right? And that's like the 3-act story: status quo, you meet the characters, set the stakes; conflict, they encounter the friction; resolution, everything's all good. That's a simple story. So conflict is what makes a story gripping and arresting and memorable and shareable. Well, when you talk about being an entrepreneur and favoring control over certainty, it's a lot more conflict in there, right? Because
Sure.
you don't have certainty. You don't know. There's more conflict, more open-ended questions. So it's a better story than to say something about a role that has total certainty. That is not to say people who crave certainty or have jobs that are conducive to certainty are somehow less skilled or innovative, or that these things are wrong or bad or less worthy of your time. Absolutely not. They're just different. The problem is, because of the way we work, because of what we like as story, the entrepreneurial path tends to have more memorable stories. So we put it up on a pedestal and we say, oh, that must be what the more successful people do. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, going back to Salesforce, who's the number 10, who's the number 30 person at Salesforce, who's, behind the scenes, you never see them, very successful, help grow. So in their own ecosystem, they have been entrepreneurial or visionary or try things and testing, but that's the way it works for them. And they're, by every metric, are probably incredibly successful. But to your point is, it's not sexy to go, okay, you're in a boardroom all day and you're making these decisions, and Salesforce is going, and you're going, well, that's a big building, or it doesn't have that sexy thing. Versus I left, they'd rather see the number 3, 4, 5, 6 person leave Salesforce and leave the big building and leave the
Right.
certainty, and off we go. And we just also with this device and social media and everything else, it's very easy to tell our own stories to make ourselves feel good.
Yep.
And someone said it to me today. I was just on a call with somebody before, and they said the problem is that you're comparing your whole life, the film of your life, to someone's highlight reel. Right.
Yes.
And you're
Yes.
making judgments against their highlight reel, and sometimes making yourself go crazy. But you don't, to your point, you don't see behind the scenes. You don't see all the late nights. You don't see all the decisions. All you see are the quick cuts that somebody edited to get rid of the boring parts and get rid of the not the goods, or get rid of that I said something wrong, because again, we're presenting an image that goes out there. And
Yep.
then that even we talked about Gary, but Gary's, his image continues to evolve, because to your point is, that was one of my frustrations. And watching some of that is in there, some really great tactical things, but then everybody is going, I have to work till 3 a.m. and I'm going to live on 4 hours of sleep. And I'm going, that's not going to end well for people.
Right, right. And I do know a little bit. I'm not a follower of his. I do know a little bit that he said publicly, like, this is how I like to work and live. It's not how you should. And while he's said that, I think what maybe is something he needs to get better at is understanding how actions, like the way you comport yourself, will inspire your followers' behavior a lot more than the words you say.
Yes.
When you're that visible, when you're that public, we're talking about leadership, right? We just went through a really potent example.
Sure.
If an executive or a president or a government official, if they're wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, the people who live by their every word, they will do the same thing, right? So the way you act models the behavior for everybody else. And I think that's another issue with sort of these lionized personalities, that you are getting the highlight reel. I am someone who works in content production. It's manipulative.
Sure.
I can play a music track. I can do a quick cut. I can add some voiceover. I can cut to some B-roll or use some, sound effects. I can make you feel the way I want you to feel. And to me, it's the Spider-Man thing: with great power comes great responsibility.
Absolutely.
You got to learn how to wield these tactics to deliver some version. It won't be the actual truth, but some version of the truth in stories, and not try to overemphasize one part at the detriment of the dirty details, right? It's like a glorious entrepreneurial journey. No, it was hard, right? But a lot of people don't care about that. A lot of people do want to build themselves up. And I'm not just talking about Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm talking about anybody who's trying to profess to be successful. Even if they don't mean to do this to you, they haven't necessarily stopped to think through, all right, if I package this story this way, or I post this thing or these types of things this many times, I'm creating this kind of story or perception, right? Because maybe they're not like me from production. They don't know what's going on when they post these things. So I'm not saying they have malintent, but perhaps they've just overlooked the fact that that behavior begets more behavior from those paying attention, and perhaps sends those people into the wrong thing, right? Like, easy example is everyone thinking entrepreneurship is somehow better.
Right. And I think, and to your point, as we sort of wrap this conversation, is, and I think it's a great lesson for everyone who's listening, is all eyes are on you. Very much, anyone who's a parent always realizes that your children are watching everything you do. And when we were children, one of the things that we always hated is when our parents would say, do it because I told you. Or you'd say, well, you're not doing it. So, well, I'm an adult. You have to do that. These mixed messages. But when you're on a team or you're building a team, you have to understand is that everybody's watching you to model behavior. And the successful leaders have their actions match their words. Not every time. I mean, again, we're human, but their goal is to say, I walk my talk. If I ask you to do something, I'm going to do it. Or if I say this, we follow up. And that's what has to happen. And it's more often than not, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
Right. And to your point is this, what we see, the image of what we think entrepreneurship, or the image that we think leaders are, that's the highlight reel. Whether they edited it or someone else filmed it and the film person edited it, the point is you don't see the day-to-day. You're not in the boardroom. You're not in those meetings. You're not up in the middle of the night when someone's going, what did I get myself into? Those types of stressful things. So I really think that's awesome. I ask every guest, I do ask this one question of everybody. So looking back over your career, someone who impacted you in a positive way, what was one of the best pieces of advice? Could be for leadership or just could be to move you through the world. What was one of the best pieces of advice that someone gave you that either sits with you today, or you just said, that was a great turning point for me?
It's not necessarily a pithy bit of advice. It's definitely a turning point, though. I had a wonderful mentor who's now a dear friend. His name's Andrew Davis, marketing speaker and author, sold an agency back in the day. He used to work in production for the Jim Henson Company when he first started out, and he wrote for Charles Kuralt on TV. So he came out of production as well, ended up in marketing as I did. And he was the one who I'd hinted at, helped me see the behind the scenes, the mechanics of building a speaker business. he and I worked on the early episodes of my podcast, Unthinkable. And he used to tell me, if you want your content, this is, not just specific to content, but I'll use that because that's what happened to me. If you want your content to be consistent and consistently better, you actually need to find the structure of it. Like, constraints breed better decision making and more creativity. And to that point, I'd said, no, I don't want a structure. I don't want a formula for how to do my episodes. I just want to go on gut feel. And I did that for a while and I burnt out hard. So whether or not you make things like I do for a living, or you're making decisions in a boardroom, finding the structure, finding not the repeatable process necessarily, but just having that framework in mind. And one example is when I produce episodes, knowing the blocks that I need to move through of an episode. It has this way of bringing out your best. And then when you need to improve, you improve with purpose, because you can look at the framework and say, which is broken? Okay, the second block, like minute 5 to minute 15 in most of our episodes, we lose people. Well, what's going on? So having a structure, having a plan. So the way I phrase this is, before I was pure gut feel, whereas Drew helped me point that gut feel in the right directions. If I had this like burning creative fire, he helped me point it to make it hotter in one specific focused way, which was to be a systems thinker,
Right.
and not just brute force my way through my work. So I'd say that switch happened. I don't know if it happened late or early for me, depending on other people, but I'd say right around 27, 28 was the first time I thought, oh, wow, this work I'm doing is better. And I still have more energy left over.
Right.
Because I know the framework of what I'm trying to build. I'm not just going on total gut feel. So what I like to say is, now what I do is I lead with intuition and course correct with data. I have a plan, but I break the plan where it seems to make sense.
That's great. Yeah, I really like that. And I like that idea of framing things. I was an actor for some time, and that was one of the big arguments. You had actors who said, oh, it's my freedom. And the director said, actually, the more constrained you are, the more free you are, because your guardrails, your boundaries.
Yeah.
And even some successful podcasts, other podcasts as well, besides yours, that I listen to, what I like is their rhythm of the blocks. You actually look forward to the block.
Yeah.
If they end the show a certain way, you're like, oh, I want to hear what they're going to say this, but you have a destination point, versus a free form where you go, where the hell is this headed, versus chunks. And it's one of the things that I continue to work on with mine is, doing it enough to go, okay, what do I like? What do I don't like? And that's also why you're here too, to help. So again, thank you so much. So before we leave, how can the audience find you? Where do you hang out? Where on social media? How can they track you? Where
Sure.
do they find your podcast? All the rest.
Everything is at jayacunzo.com. So the multiple shows that I've done and continue to do, the writing, the newsletter, the speaking, I just put it in one place, jayacunzo.com. We just overhauled the site, so I'm really proud of it. It's like, finally my home base exists on the internet instead of all these thousands of projects spinning off into the ether. So just jayacunzo.com.
Great. Thank you so much. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. This has been a lot of fun. We could sit here and chat all day on this. But again, folks, if you've gotten to this point, please remember to subscribe. Just click. We release podcast episodes every single week on Wednesday. So please share. There's a lot of people out there who need this type of help. The goal, as we've said at the beginning, is to help those who find themselves in charge of a team or a project or a business get better at this. We're all figuring it out. So anybody who tells you they have it all figured out, they are not really being truthful to you. So again, thank you for your attention. And as I say at the end of every episode, you're in charge, but now Jay gave you a few more tools to help you become more successful. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next episode.